Hey, good evening, everyone. We are going to begin with Perek Hey. So before we start Perek Hey, this is kind of a new time period for the Malchei Bavel, and I just put a timeline that I made up. It's not really so well done here, but it's on the sheet. So let's take a look at it before we start, just to kind of I think many of us have heard of a lot of these names and events, but this way it will just give us a little bit more familiarity with what's going on. So we've concluded the first four parakim, which ends with Nebuchadnezzar. So the timeline that I made here, here's what I was envisioning, just so you know what each thing represents. Basically, it's an 80-year timeline. Okay, so there are four. They're supposed to be equidistant, but I completely eyeballed it, so it's not measured, so don't get all bent out of shape. There's supposed to be four equidistant, like small lines, one all the way on the far left and all the way on the far right. So those four each line represents 20 years. That's how I'm putting it. Okay, so starting from,
which one are you talking about?
Meaning the black/gray lines, the ones that don't have anything connected to them. There's like four of them. They're supposed to be somewhat equidistant from each other. And each one represents, from one to the next is 20 years. So we're talking 80 years in total, okay? So what is starting all the way on the left? We're starting on the left there. So we're assuming that the left is that is the year that Nebuchadnezzar becomes Melech, okay? That's all the way on the left is year 0 or 1, whatever you want to call it. That's where Nebuchadnezzar becomes the king.
On the left.
Yeah, all the way on the left, where it says before it says exiles many to Babel.
Year 0.
Yeah, the line before that is going to be year 0 with year 1. That's Nebuchadnezzar becoming the Melech. If you want to know when does that occur, that's, again, there's lots of opinions on this. I'm not a history buff, but it's somewhere in the 400 BCs. Okay, if you care. Okay, fine. So that's Nebuchadnezzar becoming Melech. But this what I'm about to tell you is based off of the Gemara and the Medrash called Seder Olam, which is like the Jewish history written by Rabbi Yossi, one of the Tanaim, and this is how he comes up with it. So he basically says there that the first line there with that has like a box above it, says exiles many to Babel. So when does that happen? That happens, the Gemara says this, and says in Seder Olam as well, this happens in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's Malchus. Now again, in the 8th year of his Malchus, he does not conquer Yerushalayim. I mean, he doesn't have the Chorban, doesn't destroy it, but he goes in and he exiles many to Babel. That's when the Gemara says that's when Mordechai HaTzadik. Correct, that's 11 years before the Chorban. Are you saying that's correct? So that happens in around year 8, right? That's why it's kind of like it's not quite right in the middle of the two lines, because each line is 20 years apart. So it's a little bit over, so it's like 8 years in. Okay, fine. Then if you go 11 years up, which is 19 years into Nebuchadnezzar's Malchus, that is where the Chorban occurs, right? It's right before that little line, which is supposed to be year number 20. So we have him exiling everyone in year 8, and now 11 years later is the Chorban, okay? And he's 19 years into his Malchus. Now, according to the Gemara and the Seder Olam, Nebuchadnezzar is a Melech for 45 years. Okay, and that is based off of Psukim. We're not learning Sefer Melachim inside. If you just read the Psukim and you put 3 or 4 Psukim together, you'll come to that conclusion. It's pretty straightforward. He was a Melech for 45 years. Okay, the stories that we've been learning about with Daniel. So the first story, Perek Aleph, was when the whole thing with the kosher food. That is happening even somewhere before exiling many to Babel, right? That's even before that, because he exiles many to Babel in the 8th year, and that's the Melech at that point is a Melech called Yehoiachin, and Nebuchadnezzar, and the story with Daniel we know is occurring at the times of a Melech called Yehoiakim. So it's a little before that, just to put things in perspective. That's what it sounds like.
Not from
the Cheresh Hamaskir, I think so. That's what I'm putting together. Yeah. Yes, correct. Correct. No, so exiling many to Babel in year 8, that was in the Malchus of Yehoiachin.
At the same time, he was also
correct. Correct. No. So Yehoiakim preceded Yehoiachin. So Yehoiakim preceded that exile of many to Babel, meaning he was the Melech before that exile occurred. But it seems like there were some people at some point taken to Bavel at that point during Yehoiakim. Meaning, if you look at the first parak says that it starts out right B'shnas shalosh l'malchus Yehoyakim, Nebuchadnezzar came to Yerushalayim and he brought people there.
First parak of Daniel.
Yeah, that's the first parak. You weren't. I don't know if you were you here the first. That was Mama's first week.
I'm not sure.
Okay, fine. So that is something that precedes that event.
But when the many exiles, that was the same time they also took Yehoiachin and put him in jail. Right?
Yes, correct.
He was exiled and he replaced him with whatever, Tzidkiyahu.
With the correct, yes. Okay. So the part where so that's basically everything we've been learning about has occurred during that time period. If you go right in the around the middle of the timeline, it's supposed to represent year 45, where it says Evil Merodach becomes king. Now, Evil Merodach, I just put him on there. We're not going to have him. He's not mentioned in Sefer Daniel. We are starting tonight, Parak with Belshazzar. So that is the missing link. That Evil Merodach part is not really mentioned here. There is a medrash. I didn't put it on the sheet. It's a medrash in Vayikra, and Vayikra Rabbah, Parak Yod Ches. The medrash says something interesting about Evil Merodach. The medrash says, based off of our shir last week, when Nebuchadnezzar went insane, whether he turned into an animal, he went nuts or whatever it is. So the medrash says, what happened during that time? Evil Merodach became the king, and they made him the king. And then when Nebuchadnezzar got better, after the medrash says 7 years, but 7 years, 7 periods, whatever it is, he goes back on the throne, and he throws Evil Merodach in jail. And then what happens is he's in jail and being treated not well. And then when Nebuchadnezzar dies, they come to him and they say, hey, your time's up. You're next. And he says, oh, not again. He says, no, I'm not doing that. Because last time we thought he was gone, right? And I went on the throne and I got thrown in jail. So the medrash says, actually, forgot exactly, I might be off. Everything now I pretty much remember. The last part I don't exactly remember, but something along the lines of I don't know if they interred Nebuchadnezzar or they just took his body because he hadn't been buried yet. Basically, they took his body and they threw him down from him. They brought him to jail and they threw it to Evil Merodach and said, look, see, your father's dead. And then it says that he went on the throne. Now, Evil Merodach, according to the Gemara, was king for 23 years.
Does that include his first thing?
That's a good child. So we don't know. We don't know. And I'll tell you, again, I don't know really much about history. I just know that according to some sources in secular history, Evil Merodach is only king for 2 years. So this is if you're really into this kind of stuff, so you have to work that out, what's going on. Chazal say 23 years, it says there 2 years. So
a simple answer might be that it was 21 years.
Right. Okay. Right. So I'm saying there's lots of different ways to deal with this. One of the things I was pointing out, right? Meaning maybe it includes some of that time he was on when Nebuchadnezzar was there. And the other factor just to keep in mind here is that according to secular history, there are other kings that aren't mentioned in Chazal. So many people say a very simple answer is just that maybe some of those kings are subsumed under what Chazal call Evil Merodach. Again, Chazal feel his 23 years. Maybe it's not literally Evil Merodach, it's Evil Merodach with other kings. That's also a possibility. Okay, whatever. We're not doing history. I don't know enough about it to say, but that much I do know. Now, tonight we're going to come to Belshazzar. So then Belshazzar becomes king. So this is...
The question is why Daniel is during there's definitely a period of time between Nebuchadnezzar's death and Belshazzar's ascension.
For sure. Hands down.
According to everybody.
Correct.
And Jewish, and yet Daniel
there's no story.
Recorded interactions at all.
Very good, right. So Ari's just saying, no matter how you slice it, right, there's clearly some gap between Nebuchadnezzar dying and Belshazzar that is not coming up in our Sefer.
Or it could be Daniel nothing was.
Nothing, yeah, either that or nothing, yeah. Yeah, presumably it just wasn't substantial enough for us to know about. So that's where we're going to begin tonight, Parak with Belshazzar. Okay, so Belshazzar becomes king. Belshazzar is king for 2 or 3 years. We are going to start tonight. Don't mean to spoil it, but it's really the end of his reign. Okay, so we're at the end of his reign. So here we go. Parak. Belshazzar Malka Ava L'Chem Rav. So he makes this big party, the Rav Vanoi Alaf, for all of these people. V'lakavel Alpa Chamar Shaseh. And all these people come, and there's lots of wine served there. It's really just a great time had by all. Now, who is Belshazzar?
Wow, I didn't know.
So there's a machlokas here. Okay, it's machlokas here. Rashi says Belshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar's son, his other son. Evil Merodach and Belshazzar are brothers. He's his other son. And almost all the other Mefarshim, the Metzudos David on the bottom says this, and other Mefarshim say he is what most people believe to be his grandson. Okay, so Belshazzar is either the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar or the second son of Nebuchadnezzar, and he becomes king, and he makes this grand party. Now, why is he making this grand party? So there's two approaches here. If you look at Rashi Rashi says, Avad Lachem Rav. He makes this huge party. And it says, Rashi says, what's happening here is this is the day where he had some big war against Daryavesh and Koresh. Put those names aside, we're not going to get into that now, but two people. The Natzach HaMelchama, and he won. Ula Erev Asa Mishte. And that evening, he made a party. So this was a celebratory party for some kind of battle that he won. That's what Rashi says. If you look at source number 1 on the Mar Makomos, so this is a famous Gemara in Megillah, and the Gemara maps out now all the timeline that we discussed. The Gemara says, Vayhi b'shloshim b'sheva shana. Okay, skip that. I'm gonna read that. Vayhi b'shloshim b'sheva shana. It was 37 years legalus Yehoyachin, since Yehoyachin was sent into Galus, Melech Yehuda. Asher Haya, that took place b'shana ches to Nebuchadnezzar, in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar. So it was 37 years since that occurred, which means 45 years since he had become king, right? Because he sent him into exile in year 8, and now it had been 37 years. And what happened? The pasuk continues: Nasa Evil Merodach Melech Bavel. Evil Merodach became king. Bishnas Malchuso Esrosh Yehoyachin Melech Yehuda Vayetze Osomi Beis Hakalu. And he took this person, Evil Merodach. He took Yehoyachin out of jail. Okay, fine. So now the Gemara does a little bit of math. It says, Timani, 8, Utlasin Vesheva, plus 37, Hare, Arban Vachamisha de Nebuchadnezzar. That's 45 years Nebuchadnezzar was king. Esrin Utalas, 23, de Evil Merodach, Gemara. That's a tradition. There was 23 years Evil Merodach was the king. Vitarti Dide, and 2 years that Belshazzar was the king. So what number are we up to? Ha Shivin. That is 70 years. And why is 70 years the magic number? Because the nevuah in Sefer Yirmiyahu is that Klal Yisrael would go into Galus for 70 years. Very good. Okay, so good. So let's take a look at this. So Belshazzar said, Hashta vadai su lo mifriki. Now the Jewish people will not be redeemed. Why? Because it's been 70 years and the prophecy has not been fulfilled. Now, as Tzvi pointed out, it depends when you're counting the 70 years from. If you count the 70 years from the time that Nebuchadnezzar becomes king, now it's true, Klal Yisrael wasn't in Galus during that time, but what would be the logic of counting 70 years from then? Probably just because that's when his Malchus spreads throughout the world and he's in charge. But obviously that was incorrect. So as Tzvi pointed out, right? It's 70 years, but it's not the 70 years we're looking for. So what happens? Apik money debei mikdasha. He takes out the kalim of the Beis Hamikdash v'ishtamish b'hu. He's using them. Hainu deka'amar le Daniel, and Daniel is going to say to him later in the parak we're about to learn. He says, Al mare shemaya hisramamta. You lifted yourself up over God in heaven. Ulamanya dibesa, and for the kalim of his house, haisiv kadamach, you brought before you, and you had no respect for Hashem. So the Gemara says this is not based off of the war thing. This is based off of this, he knows about the nevuah, and he decides to do this. I did see a suggestion, an interesting shot, that says, which kind of answers a little bit of Tzvi's question, which is that, it could have been both of them together, right? Meaning, so how does he know the nevuah has to be to the T, right? How does he know exactly as soon as it hit the clock strikes 12 that the nevuah is supposed to be Mekuyam? So why, maybe he should have proceeded with caution. Maybe the nevuah would have taken a little bit of time to go on. So I saw someone suggested that maybe what's going on there is you have both things, right? Meaning there's this nevuah that says basically the downfall of Bavel, and what happens? There's this big milchama. And what's the outcome of the milchama? The outcome of the milchama is that he's victorious. So these other people are fighting Bavel. Bavel's victorious. So that's like a sure sign in his head. Like, it's not just the time. It kind of makes it more real. It's not the time. It's like the time. And then he sees this playing out in real time and he wins the war. So he says, that's it. I defeated God. So now let's take a look at what happens. Moving on. So he has this big party and he takes out all the kalima of the Beis Hamikdash, it says in Pasuk Beis. And they're drinking wine out of them. And we're going to take a look at Pasuk Hay. Here we go, Pasuk Hay, and this is the famous thing that many people know. Ba'ashata, at that time, while everyone is, enjoying themselves at the party, Nefaka etzba'an diyad enash. There are fingers of the hand of a person come out, the kasvan, and they start writing, La Kavel Nevrashta, opposite the light. So there was some kind of, lamp or something, there, meaning, and why is it stressing that? It means this is somewhere everyone can see, right? It's light and everyone can see, and it's writing, Algira de Kesal Echla di Malka, and it's writing on the wall, Pasuk Hey. Okay, it's writing on the wall of the king, of the palace of the king. Umalka Chazeh, and what does the king see? Pas Yada di Kasva. He sees there is this hand which is writing. So it sounds like two things are going on. It sounds like first it says like there's fingers, and then the king sees the hand, right? But basically, it's whatever. It's a hand without an arm. So what happens? Pasuk Vav. Edayan Malka Ziyohi Shinohi. His face, his complexion changes, right? He's like completely, scared. V'rayonohi yivahalune, and his thoughts, he starts to tremble, and he's totally freaked out. V'kitrei chartzei mishtarayan, v'arkubase dalada nakshan. His loins are like loosening, and his knees, literally, it says his knees are banging on each other, right? He's like shaking. Kari malka b'chayo. So he calls to all of the wise people. Now, whether they were in the other room at another part of the party or they weren't there, and they're, I don't know. And he says to them, L'chakime bavel, to the wise people, Dikol enash diikre kesava dena upishre yechavinani. Here we go again. Whoever can read this weird thing on the wall and tell me what it means, Argavana yobash, I will dress him in this fancy clothing. Vehamnicha didava al tzavre, I'll put this fancy gold jewelry around his neck. Vitalti the malhusa ishlat, and he will rule over a third of the kingdom. Okay, so everyone is there. Pasuk Ches Edayin Olin kol chakimei malka. Everyone rushes in to see what's so urgent. V'lo chahalin kesava lemikre. This is an important pasuk. We'll get back to this one. They were unable to read the writing. Upishrei lahoda lemalka, and to know what it means. Okay. So he obviously is getting very frustrated and very nervous. And in walks in Pasuk Yud, I'm just saying this outside, in walks in Pasuk Yud, the queen. Now it's not clear which queen this is, right? This might be like the initial queen, some people say, like, is this Nebuchadnezzar's wife? So she's like the bubby queen, right? Or is it Belshazzar's own wife? Not clear. Okay, different reasons why. Maybe, if it's Nebuchadnezzar's wife, they say that's why she's not the party. She's like this old royal woman, like she's not, hanging around and doing partying. If it's Belshazzar's wife, so why is she at the party? No one knows. She comes in, and what does she say in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Pasuk 11? Isai Kvar b'malchusach. There is a guy in your kingdom. Divrach Elohim kadishin bei. He has the spirit of God in him. Uveyomei avuch, and in the days of your father. That's why Rashi says Belshazzar is his son, because they're about to say in the days of your father, he really came in. He came in, right, when the game was on the line. So, and other people say the pasha. They say it just means in the days of your ancestor, not literal father. This, grandfather is called father. We find that right in Pachad Elokei Aviv Yitzchak in the Torah. He's brilliant. Umalka Nebuchadnezzar avuch. And the king Nebuchadnezzar, your father, ancestor, Rav Chartumen Ashbin Kazdon Gazrin Hakime Avuch Malka. Okay, so he helped out your grandfather, and he says, the queen says, you got to ask this person for help. So let's skip to Pasuk Yud Gimel in 13. Beidayan Daniel Hual Kada Malka. So Daniel's brought into the king, and the king says to Daniel, you are Daniel, unto Daniel. Dimin b'nei galusa di Yehud, right? You're the Yehud, you're the Jew, Yehudi, who came from God, who we brought. Di haisi malka avi min Yehud, that my father, my ancestor, brought these Jews over to our country, and you're one of them. And he says, I hear that you're the real deal. You know this stuff. And he says, there's this writing on the wall, and nobody can interpret it. Okay, let's turn to Pasuk. Yud Zayin. So here we go for the interpretation. Beit Zayin, Ane Daniel. So Daniel at that point says, Kadamalka, Matanasach loch lehevyan. Very reminiscent of, right, Avram Avinu, right? He says, I don't want your presents. Keep your presents. Your presents, you can keep. I'm not interested in that. Unviz biyasach la'achar anhav. Anything you have, give it to other people, not for me. Biram, however, Kisava ekre lamalka. I will help you out. I will tell you what this secret message is. Upishra ahodiine, and I'll tell you what's going on. So he says, here's the deal, Belshazzar. Ant Malka, you're the king. Eloha ilaha malchusa revusa v'yikara v'hadra. Yahav leNebuchadnezzar avuch. God in heaven, the real king, he granted dominion to your ancestor Nebuchadnezzar. Umin revusa di yahav le. And what did God give to Nebuchadnezzar? Pasuk Yud Tes 19. Kol amemaya umaya v'lishanaya. Every person under the sun, essentially. Havozayin v'dachalan min kadamohi, was completely and utterly frightened from your grandfather. He was the man. Di havot saveh havokatel. He would kill whoever he wanted. V'di havot saveh havamacheh. And if he wanted to let you off, he would. V'di havot saveh havamarin. He wanted to lift you up and exalt you, he would. V'di havot saveh havamashpil. And to throw you down on the ground, he would do that at his will. And then he says, Pasuk Chav 20, Ukidi. Rim livave, when his heart got haughty, the ruche tikpas lahazada, and his spirit, became big within him. Hanchas min karsei malchusei, v'yikara hediv mine. What did God do to him? So this is what we learned in last week's parak, right? Once Nebuchadnezzar really pushed it, and he was at the brink, Hashem said, "That's it, you're done." And Pasuk Chaf Aleph, he just explains how he basically went out and became an animal. Again, whether he literally became an animal, he went crazy. But the point is, Hashem completely showed him his boss. And now Pasuk Chaf Beis 22. Va'ant berei Belshazzar, and you are his child Belshazzar. Lo hashpelta livavach. You did not submit yourself. Kol kavel di kol dina yadata. Despite the fact that you know all of this. You knew everything. You know the history. And look what you're doing. You're not only celebrating, it's like in our face. Like you take out the kelim of the base of Mikdash, you make a party with it. It's like really stooping low. Okay. So Pasuk Chav Daled, he now says this is what's going on. Beidzayan min kadamohi shaliach pasa diyada. And you saw during this big party, there was a hand that started writing on the wall. Ukesava, the writing dinar rishim that it inscribed. Udina kesava di rishim. Here is what it said. Okay, what does it say? Pasuk Chafhei. This is the message. Minei tekel ufarsin. Minei tekel ufarsin. Doesn't help because it's in Aramaic, right? So what does this mean? Chavlav, dina peshar milsa. This is the meaning of the pasuk. Minei comes from the word minyan, right? To count. Mina elaha, God has counted. Malchusach, your kingship. The hashlama, shalem. It is complete. It's over. Okay. So God has counted your kingship and it's over. Chav Zayin, tikal. Tikal means, so in Aramaic, the taf and the shin are interchangeable. So tikal is like the word shakal, to weigh. So tikal, he is weighed. What does this mean? Tikilta bimoznaya. God has, so to speak, weighed you in the scales in heaven. V'hishtekachat chasir. And you've come out missing. You've come up short. Okay. So minei, you've been.
Why is minei double?
Oh, that's a good question. Why is minei double? So, where was it? I saw. Yeah, because Daniel does not explain that. So there's two pshatim. The pasuk pshat is that it's doubled, like we find in Chumash, right? What does Yosef say to Paro, right? Va'al hishanos hachalom Paro pamayim. Why is the dream repeated twice? Kinachon hadavar meim ha'elokim. Because it is ready. It's going to happen. It's doubling in the Torah is always like it's real.
It's only the first line. Like
It doesn't repeat everything.
Repeat the whole thing.
Granted, yeah. True. So yeah, that's a valid point. So to answer Ari's question, right? Ari says, yeah, but that's only the first line. So I think another pshat is, I forgot where I saw this, but for the sake of time, I'll just say it. I don't know who says this, but I think Minei is referring to the two kingdoms because it's like Bavel, and then following that is Parasumadai, right? It's Bavel, Parasumadai, and then what happens? Then the Jews go back. So it's like there's a double counting because it's him and he's going to segue into Parasumadai, and then will come the Geula, so to speak, when they go back for the second base of Mikdash. Good. That's what I really want to talk about. That's going to be Bays, and we're going to discuss it in Ma'amar Komas. Right? Why is the Malach or Hashem writing in Aramaic? Ari's asking, why is he writing in Aramaic? Right. Right, the Malach cannot, right, yeah. Right, the Gemara says Malachim can't understand.
It's much simple than at least the way to David said it.
Yeah.
Hashem is counting like your days, like he's counting your count. Like Minay, like.
Oh, he's counting
like,
your count. Okay, you're counting. Very good.
Something like that. He says, Shalakim mana minyan yemei malchuscha. Hashem is counting.
Kiva moed.
They count, your years.
Okay.
Total.
I see what you're saying. I thought the last part where he says Vihishanos hadavar, and it is repeated pa'amayim 2 times, lomar, to indicate shaminyan bediktuk, that it's like really. Yeah. Okay, fine. Pasuk Chav. Okay, so let's see the end, and then we're going to deal really the rest of the time with Ari's thing. Why is this in Aramaic? Pasuk Chav Ches. Peres. What's peres? Peres means to be a piece of something, right? That's why you have the word pras, right? In Gemara, a lot talks about pras. Pras is like a broken piece of bread. Perisas malchusach. Your kingship will be broken. V'yehivas l'madai uparas, and it will be given to Madai uparas. I wonder if that's not right, coincidental, right? Paras, Persia is Paras, is also broken, right? Your kingship is broken. It's going to be given to Paras, which we know is Persia, but Paras is also broken. Okay, Pasuk Chavtes says Belshazzar is amazed, and he awards Daniel. He puts on this big fancy robe. He gives him this nice jewelry around his neck. And Pasuk Lamed concludes, Bei Belelia, that night, Ketil Belshazzar Malka Kazda. Belshazzar was assassinated that night. Okay, that's the end of Belshazzar. So what's going on here with this writing, and why is God writing in Aramaic? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin, in Simon Beis here, says something kind of neat. It says Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi says, Ra'ui Haya Ezra, Shetinasing Torah al Yado li Yisrael. Ezra, who we haven't learned about yet, but eventually leads the Bnei Yisrael back to the second base of Mikdash. He was so great, Rabbi Yossi says, the Torah could have been given to him as like it was to Moshe. Va'af al pi shelo nitna Torah al Yado. The Torah was not given to Ezra because it was given to Moshe. Nishtana al Yado hakasav. During the times of Ezra, what does happen? There is a new type of kisav, a new type of lettering that the Jewish people got. How does he prove this? So he says, all the people who were at the party, and again, that's interesting, he's assuming, I guess, that there were Jews there as well, right? He says, no one could la kahalin kisava lemikra. No one could read the words on the wall. Okay? Uksiv, and the Torah says, V'kasav es mishnei haTorah hazos. You should write the Mishnah haTorah. Now, what does the word Mishnah mean? So it could mean a few things. One of the things it means is the word shinoi, means to change. And the Torah says you should write this changing Torah. What does that mean? Rabbi Yossi says it means kasav haroi lehishtanos. It is it's writing which is going to change. Okay? Skip the last part, we'll come back to it. So Rabbi Yossi says something fascinating here. Okay? You would not believe this is in a Gemara if you didn't read it inside.
He's saying that it was written in the Ksav Ashuri.
Right.
Why nobody can read it.
So Rabbi Yossi says that what happened? Rabbi Yossi says that that the Jewish people really originally had some kind of ksav. He says there's a few dots I put in there. It's elsewhere in the Gemara there. The Gemara says Rabbi Yossi believes originally the type of lettering, aleph base, that the Jews had was something called ksav ivri. Ksav ivri, not the aleph base that we know of. What does ksav ivri look like? So if you look, I have it on the sheet here, right? I mean, it's a copy from one of the Gemaras that they have, and it says in the bottom, basically, like, don't get so hung up on us. If you're a historian, like, things might change very small. If you have like ancient hieroglyphics or whatever, and you know how to, read this stuff, maybe it's a little off, but basically it looks like this. This is the aleph base in what's called ksav ivri.
When the archaeologists find something.
Yeah, they find it, and basically.
In the first basic era.
Yeah.
This is the writing.
This is what it looks like. Yeah. So Rabbi Yossi says, why couldn't they read it? It was written in the Aramaic language because that's what they spoke, right? I mean, presumably in Babel, that's why the whole book Daniel was written in Aramaic. But then why couldn't they read it? they couldn't read it because it was the font, so to speak. The letters were what we call ksav ashuris. They were aleph-based letters that we know of. And he says, why do we call the aleph base? If you open up a Torah, we call it ksav ashuris. Why do we call it ashuris? That's what it's called, right? It says a Torah, tefillin, mezuzah has to be written. A Megillah must be written in ksav ashuris. Why is it called that? Sha'olah imahem me ashur. The Jews brought that style of writing up with them from Ashur. Now, Ashur literally is Assyria, but the Mefarshim and the Gemara say it's really just a colloquial, it's just like a general term for like when they were in Gullus. And they got this style of writing then. Oh, very good. So Ari's, okay, that's why I'm doing this fascinating stuff. So let's go. So Moshe, according to Rabbi Yossi, Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah was not written the way our Torah is written. Now, this is going to be very troubling. We'll see why in a moment, okay? As I said, it sounds like it's not a Gemara, but it is. It sounds like it's, some other things, but it's Gemara. So let's take a look at the next two opinions, and then we're going to deal with this. Tanya, Rebbe Omer, what does Rebbe say? B'tchila b'kesav zeh nitna Torah liyisrael. Rebbe says, no. The Jewish people were given the Torah with the aleph beis as we have it. Kevan shechatu, when they sinned, I think he means with the golden calf, but it might mean even later. I don't know, maybe by the time. I don't know if he means by the golden calf or by the Beis Hamikdash. I'm not sure. Some point they did something wrong. Nepach lahen l'roetz. This lettering impaired them. Like they were not able to read it, essentially.
So not that it changed. The original Torah, that if we were to find it, you wouldn't be able to open the Aron.
According to Rebbe,
assuming that it's still in the Aron,
was what we have.
Obviously, we're not opening it, right?
Correct, but if right, Raiders lost art, right?
But if it was open, according to Rebbe, the machlokas seems to be, according to Rebbe, this is the ksav it would be.
Yep, you got it.
According to Rabbi Yossi,
it's some other. We would open up and say, what on earth is this?
And then it'll be different. Though Rabbi Yossi doesn't have to necessarily mean that. Moshe, the one.
We're going to get to that. Okay, good. We're going to get to that. All right, good. Okay, so then he says, Kevan shechazru bahen. Once they did teshuvah at some point, hechaziru lahem. They got back the original aleph base. So why do we call it Ashuris? It's very odd. Ashur, right? Ashur means like it's from Assyria or from some other nation. It should be called like the lettering of God. Like why do we call it Ashuris? Lama nikra shema Ashuris. It's the original writing. Because Ashuris also comes from the word me'ushar, ishur, like in Ishur, if you go to Israel, right? Ishur shem me'usheres b'ksav. It is the, I'll use the word nicest for lack of a better word, but it's the, it's the nicest ksav, right? And the style of it is that of royalty, so to speak. Okay. Third opinion. Amar mishum Rabbi Elazar Hamodai, kisav ze lo nishtane kol ikr. He says nothing ever changed. So let's get this down. There are three opinions, okay? There's three opinions about this. Opinion number one says, Torah was given in, you have it on your sheet here, in this funny thing that looks like hieroglyphics. Rabbi Yossi says, Torah was given like that, and eventually we got this new lettering, and that's why they couldn't read it. Rebbe says, Torah was given in our aleph base, and eventually the Jews forgot about it, and then it was restored. So how do we have all of this kind of writing in things we find? Rebbe would say, we have it because there was a period where they lapsed into that. Third opinion is Rebbe Elazar says, nope, nothing changed. So the Gemara then asks the next line, De amar kesav lo ze lo nishtana. If you believe the writing never changed, my lo chohalin kesav mikra. Why couldn't anyone there read it? Now it's interesting to me, just a side point. It seems to believe then that the Babylonians there, I guess, could read Hebrew. Like I thought the obvious answer is because why would they know Hebrew? Like it's written in our letters. Why would they know it? So it's either assuming that they did know it or that there were other Jews present and no one could read it, and Daniel's the only one. Okay, so the point is, if the Ksav never changed, how can no one read it?
I mean, the Gemara seems to say that you can't interpret the verse to mean that nobody understood it. The Gemara is saying clearly, like in other words, right? You might have been answering and said, maybe somebody holds that. Of course they could read it. They just didn't know what it means. Good. The language of the Mikra means didn't understand it.
Correct.
So
good.
That's not how the Gemara is not taking that as an option.
Correct. So Ari's asking you a good question. The Gemara seems to say they couldn't read it. Maybe they could read it, they just couldn't interpret it. So I think it's based off of the pasuk. The pasuk says they could not read Kesava Lemikre Upishrei lahodal lamalka, and its interpretation they could not do either. So the pasuk does say double.
Because it's redundant.
It's redundant. Then
obviously, but it's still difficult. If the Gemara's version, if you say they couldn't read it, if you can't read it, of course you can't explain it. How could you explain something that's unreadable?
No, right. No.
Why did you say that?
I'll tell you. So lest someone make your mistake, meaning so that no one says, when it says they couldn't read it, it just means they couldn't read it, means they couldn't really chap, right? They couldn't understand it. Don't think that's what it meant. We're spelling it out for you. A, they could not read it. And B, they did not understand, and therefore they could not understand it. You see what I'm saying? Meaning, I think it's preempting your point. Get it? I think it's addressing that. So why couldn't they read it? So the Gemara gives 4 answers. Essentially, all answers have one thing in common, which is what? It was written in code. It was written in code. So what does it mean it was written in code? Rav says, "Bigematria ichtav lahom." Okay, it was written in gematria. What's the gematria? Yitati tati dach puch kamat or whatever. Okay, what does that mean, gematria? It's not the gematria we understand. The gematria means in this case something called atbash. Atbash is where you line up aleph, the first letter with the last letter, beis with the second, right? So if you do atbash like that, every letter has a corresponding letter, and you'll end up with minei, tekel, uparsin, ends up like this. Okay, it's a little interesting that it would be written like that. Okay, Shmuel says, what Basi and Tzvi let me know then is Rembrandt.
Rembrandt.
Okay, is the Rembrandt version. Okay, if you look in Rembrandt, apparently the picture of this event, so the way he paints it is mimatos nan kefi alaran. So what is that? I didn't, if you could, you kind of have to visualize this. If you take each one of those, oh, they have it there? Thank you. If you take each one of those words, right, and you write them across, so you'll see, right, meaning it spells menei tekelu parsin going down, essentially, instead of the normal way across. Thank you. And that's Rembrandt, I guess, Paskin like Shmuel. Okay, there you go.
Well, it's amazing that they used to learn Talmud in Turk.
Yeah, so maybe I mean, the Gemara says Hilchas Karav b'Yisure, right? The halacha usually follows Rav, but I don't know if this is okay. I don't know.
This is not either.
Yeah, it was not either. It's just like a story. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yochanan says it was written backwards, right? Anam. All right, basically, menei tekelu farsin. Each word is written backwards, and Rav Ashi says, I have to work this one out.
Mixed up.
It's basically mixed up. Sorry, thank you. The first and second letters are swapped, right? It's almost like it's like the backwards version of what we would call Pig Latin, right? Like you swap the first, right? Whatever. I mean, sort of. Okay. So this is what the Gemara says. Fascinating. So what really is the deal then? So we basically have 2 different pshatim. Why couldn't they read this? So either they couldn't read it because it was written in what we call Hebrew and they weren't familiar with Hebrew, or it was written in Hebrew, the Hebrew lettering. Thank you. It was written in Hebrew lettering and it was written in some kind of code. That's really what it comes down to, and that's why they couldn't read it. It just allows for an interesting discussion on the origins of the Aleph base. So this is what Ari was asking before. So who do we paskin like, right? We have 3 different opinions here. One says the Torah was given in like this, and the other 2 say no. So there's a famous Gemara that we all have heard. It's Gemara in Shabbos. Rashi brings it in Chumash. What does it say? There was a big miracle with the luchos. So what was the miracle with the luchos? There were 2 letters that were floating in midair. What does it mean floating in midair? So the Gemara says the mem and the samach in the luchos were a nes. They were floating because they are the only 2 letters that are completely closed. Okay, all other letters have some open part, but they're the only 2 letters that are completely closed.
The Torah, it's the luchos.
Right, in the luchos.
In other words, so they're arguing about the Torah that Moshe wrote. It's not. No, maybe they all agree that luchos were written.
Well, okay, so the only problem with that would be though is right. It's true. Well, the only thing is it says they got the ksav from Ashur, right? That's what it says. They brought the ksav up with them from Ashur. Why is it called Ashur's? It came up with them from Ashur. It makes it sound like it didn't exist before that.
Meaning, again, so you'll say that first of all, Yossi, this medrash doesn't have to be according to Yossi.
Right. Okay. We'll get
he doesn't hold that measure. So
right.
That could be not going to the Shita. B, he could just mean that this became the writing of all Sefer Torah.
Oh, good.
Meaning,
so let's
see.
He
may agree that this is when it became. It may have been given. The luchos may have been written that way, and it may have been even the original Sefer Torah. Moshe was written that way, but the other Sefer Torahs that they gave to the Shvatim could have been written in the way they wrote, which was the common script.
Right.
And it only became a more common script for all Sepharim after Babel.
Okay, good. So for the people on Zoom, okay, so we'll explore both of Ari's suggestions, one on the sheet and then one I'll say outside, basically coming from where Ari's headed, essentially. So the famous Gemara says the Mem and the Samach were floating in midair in the Luchos. So the question that the Rishonim ask this question, the Rishonim say, wait a minute, how could they be floating? Look at the sheet here, the Ksav Ivri. The Mem and the Samach, there's no miracle that would have to happen with the Mem and Samach. There is one letter that would have that miracle.
The ayin.
You see the ayin?
Would a lot of them actually have that problem?
The Ches would.
Maybe the
Daled
Daled.
also?
The Daled would, good. The Daled, Basi says, right, the Tes would, that's interesting. Right, that's a good
Definitely
point.
not these letters. Not the Mem and Sam.
Right, but not the Mem and Samach. So what's going on? To make matters worse, I mean, it's not a Gemara here, but we're getting into it because it's kind of interesting. But if to make matters worse, the same person who says that the Mem and the Samach were floating is Rav Chisda, and in the Gemara there in Sanhedrin, he seems to side with Rabbi Yossi.
That would be a problem.
So that's kind of a problem. It's like what's going on. So one way to deal with this, putting aside the names, one way to deal with this, what Ari said before, is to say that okay, that's one opinion, and the other opinions clearly don't hold that. The other opinions say we had this Aleph Beis from the beginning, from day one. There is a Gemara in the Yerushalmi. Okay, so this is not the Bavli, but this is the Yerushalmi. The Gemara says in Megillah. Watch what it says. Fascinating. Amar Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi says, "Man de Amar leroetz nitna haTorah." According to the opinion who says here, he uses the word leroetz to mean the Torah was given in this old ksav that no one did. This ksav ivri, this like lesser type of ksav. Ayin ma'asen nisim. The ayin was the miracle in the luchos. He's talking about the luchos. And man to Amar, according to the opinion who says Ashuri nitna haTorah, it was given in Ashuri. Samach ma'asen nisim. The samach was the miracle. So that last line, right, the Yerushalmi in the Gemara says basically that depending on how you think the Aleph Beis was at that time is going to determine what you believe the miracle was in the Luchos.
So yeah, so the Yerushalmi clearly holds that Rabbi Yossi
Is talking about
is that Shuras
was invented later on.
Brand
Brand new. Now, I will say there's another approach, and Ari said this, and the Rishonim say this. It's a little bit more exciting and acrobatic, but the Rishonim say that Rabbi Yossi says that the letters that the Jews used was what? Was this thing called Ivri, this interesting ksav. And later on in history, in Babel, they got this ksav that we're familiar with. But there are some who say that even according to Rabbi Yossi, that was the thing that the people wrote with. But the luchos that were written by God, that by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, Bechlodu V'atzmo, right? They were written by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so they were written in the Ksav Ashuris. And in order to, I guess, preserve the holiness, of and uniqueness of that Ksav, they bedavka did not use it in their everyday writing, and therefore it basically fell out of use. And essentially, it was for the luchos, zehu. That's it. And then, as time went on, what happened? Everyone's using Ksav Ivri, and it's reinstated the Ksav Ashuri when they are in Babel. So, basically, to summarize, just what comes out of this interesting thing about the Aleph Beis, is that we have, there is a three-way machlokes on the simple way of looking at it as to what were the letters like when they got the Torah and the Luchos. Again, 2 out of the 3 opinions say it was what we have.
I would say even Rabbi Lazar said he's talking about the Sefer Torah.
Yeah.
The fact that because unless you're going to say he goes against all the evidence that there wasn't such a thing called Ksav Ivri and it was used during the first.
Correct. Right.
The people.
Right. You have to say that.
He's talking. So the original, the documents that the kings wrote to pay the salaries or whatever were written in Ksav
Ivri.
Ksav Ivri. So that,
presumably, right. Ari's pointing out.
But the Sefer Torah,
right,
stuff like that.
Right. So just for the people on Zoom, Ari's pointing out. I mean, even everyone has to presumably agree to some concept that there was some Ksav Ivri at some point being used by the masses. And
even the top people.
or even the top. I'm just saying, yeah, but but aside from the Kaddish things. Okay. Next week, we will get into Perek Vav, which is Daniel in the lion's den, famous story. And
This seems to go back.
yeah, so it's not going to be in chronological order. We'll discuss that then. At this point, it's not chronological. Next week is, but then Perek Zion is not. So we'll do that, and then the following 2 weeks after that, I will be away. So we will pick up, God willing, after that. It's next week Perek Vav, off for 2 weeks, and then resume Zion. Okay, have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone.